I'm Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with the cattle market summary for the week ending May the 15th, where these outstanding spring rains just continue. Again this week, had big rains all throughout cattle country and just positive moods from everybody in the business. But continues to drive the demand for these late stockers as guys are increasing their stocking rates and turning more cattle out. And also driving these feeder cattle as we expect another good corn crop, and we expect moderate prices on feeds again this year. So just continued good prices on everything. Feeder cattle sold steady to $3 higher across the country. A lot of spots up to $8 higher, especially up in the northern plains where all of a sudden the receipts have just turned to nothing up in that country there. Those guys are busy farming and finishing up their corn, getting ready for beans. And just not any cattle moving hardly at all. Almost all your Nebraska sales were off this week. But and your calves sold good too, where we have them steady to $5 higher. What's left of the fall-born calves that are selling, and just any odd calves that are selling, are finding a lot of good outlets as guys are just continuing to buy those cattle. And we just kind of have a good feeling about the feeder cattle market going on through the end of this year. So we see good demand for all classes of feeder and stocker cattle, but your southeast was very volatile this week, just way up and way down depending on where you're at. A lot of the orders that come in from the west, the lots where they take those cattle and get them warmed up and straightened out, just really muddy, and they've pulled those orders back going out west. So places in the southeast where they had local demand were pretty good, and some that really rely on western orders were quite a bit lower. Your graze out wheat cattle in the southern plains were really held up this week by all that rain and the muddy conditions around there. Not many cattle in your Oklahoma sales there. Did towards the middle of the week when they had a little bit of break there, but on Monday Oklahoma City only had around 4,000 head, which they should be having a lot more than that. And those cattle are really, making a mess out there and clogging up the wheat fields, but and they're hard to gather when they're in the mud like that. But we should still see a few more weeks of the graze out wheat cattle coming to town when they can make it in. And good demand for heavy feeders down the southern plains by your commercial lots there. They're looking for those cattle to kind of fill those holes right after the calf feds, those cattle that were placed on feed back late last fall when those cattle are moved on out. Looking for some cattle to put in that hole right behind those. Your farmer feeders up north are just looking for anything, and they're having to move south to try to find some more cattle. A lot of those guys have contracts for distillers byproducts, and those products keep showing up and being dumped out there at their lots. And you especially notice the shelf life when it gets this time of year. You got a lot of wetness around and you get the warm temperatures, and you can tell by your nose that it's time to get some of that product moved, and they just need something to feed it to. So good demand for all weights, especially something a little bit lighter, weighing 6.5 or 7, that'll eat up a lot of that feed. In Gordon, Nebraska this week on Tuesday had a load of 831 pound steers. You see on Cattle Market Central there, brought 227 1/4. You don't see that market being published anywhere else but CMC there. Had a load of big feeder heifers there weighing right close to 900 pounds, bring 188.50. So you see a good demand in one of the few sales in Nebraska that had a sale this week. Your summer contracting of your grass yearlings has been real quiet. And normally you see those guys contract those cattle early, but they kind of got burned the last few years. So those guys really haven't even priced their cattle, even though there'll be a big demand for those cattle coming off grass mid and late summer there in early fall. But the feeder cattle futures are just running so far back what those guys are really wanting for those cattle. August and September CME feeder contracts are running under 220, and that's on a 750 pound steer, and these guys are wanting quite a bit more than that for an 800 pound steer. So they're probably going to hold off until they start having those early summer videos, and the few guys that have guts enough to put those cattle on there, and other than just appraise them, go ahead and sell them. That'll kind of set the market for where they're going to price those cattle for later contracting there. But calves right now, most all the calves are just enjoying a good life. They're getting their first bite of green grass. They're still on their mothers, just really enjoying life. Not a lot of call to bring calves to town right now. You see calves in the southeast. They sell calves all the time down there. and still a few sales of your fall-born calves, but just not much going on in the calf business right now. And but a few guys that are really buying a few calves that have the ability to turn out a few more cattle. A lot of these guys are locked in on what they can turn out, but if a guy leased a ranch or a pasture to do with what he wants, he figures that pasture is going to run a few more heads, so he's going out there and buying a few more to turn out with what he's got. But it's just taking a lot of money, and these backgrounders have yet to get used to how much more money it costs to run the same amount of cattle. And then on your cattle feeders, this basis deal, a lot of us would like to see that CME live cattle contract start trading a little bit closer to what your cash fat cattle are bringing to lend a little support to the market. But these guys that are hedged up, they're kind of enjoying this positive basis right now, and your board's just running so far behind what your cash sales are. It's really allowing for these guys to put another $8 or so in their pocket, and even though on the surface those cattle aren't making any money, once they pick up that basis right there, then a lot of times it's pushing those cattle up into where they are showing a profit. And maybe this wall of cattle, these calf feds that are about to show up, that have really been advertised as being such big numbers of market-ready cattle, maybe it's not going to be so big. We're starting to see demand for beef pickup seasonally, like it always does. Box beef made some big gains middle of the week. We've got choice boxes now bringing 260, and they're starting to stretch the choice select spread as they're up to $13 and more, almost $14 in the spread over their select, as your consumers are coming in and they're demanding those good loin cuts, those good ribeye steaks to put on the grill to feed for their Memorial Day celebration and Father's Day and things like that. But packers have yet to consistently keep the fat cattle market under 160. Nothing really breaking loose early this week. We did have a few odd sales throughout the week there, right around 160. So I think if your feedlots can keep it right there, they're pretty much happy. They'd like to get all they can, but if they can hold that 160 level, they really hate to go any lower than that. That wraps up your cattle market summary for this week. Check out DV Auction for a lot of auctions and more information. You can also find this report on the stockexchangenews.com. So from DV Auction home office here in Maysville, Missouri, we'll talk to you next week.